Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Here's today's prophecy update. Much of America will go to the polls tomorrow for what has been called Super Tuesday. The United States has seldom seen a more chaotic election season. When all is said and done, what is really the pivotal issue in the present presidential campaign? It all boils down to one issue: globalization. Which candidates believe in globalization and which do not? Which candidates believe in preserving U.S. sovereignty and which ones believe in unbridled immigration? Will America vote to abandon its Declaration of Independence and adopt a Declaration of Interdependence? When all the charges and the countercharges die down, that's what really is at stake. In prophetic terms, should we move toward one world government, or should America retain its sovereignty during these end times? Well, if you're like myself, you've been listening to all the debates, pros and cons, trying to come to some kind of an understanding as what's the real pressure points of this campaign. And it just seemed like it all came together in my mind over the last 24 hours. What really is at stake here? When it's all said and done, it's establishment versus the outsiders. That's really what this is all about. Now, we know that Jeb Bush was considered the establishment candidate. We know that Kasich is pretty well an establishment candidate, as is Marco Rubio. And I didn't know about Cruz for a while, but it was pretty obvious that he and Marco had ganged up on Trump in the last debate. And it looks more and more like Cruz is becoming more and more of an establishment candidate all the time. So what do we mean when we say the establishment? Is that just a name, or does it really have meaning? That's what we're going to talk about today, because this is a huge factor that every person needs to understand. Where does this thing establishment come from? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. Now, let's talk about breaking the stranglehold of the establishment. The establishment has pretty much controlled American politics for the last 60, 70 years. Many of us have had the feeling for a long time that we were voting for Tweedledee or Tweedledum. How did it come to this? How is it that you vote Democratic and it's like the same old continues? You vote Republican and the Democratic policies continue. And very lately, we've seen a Republican Congress. It looked like it was a huge victory for Republicans in both the Senate and the House, but they've been rubber stamping everything that Barack Obama wanted to do. And many Republicans have just been absolutely furious and say, what in the world is going on here? What's this all about? Well, it's deeper than you think, because there was a plot to take over America that was actually launched over 100 years ago. There were three things that happened within about a 10-year period. The Federal Reserve Act of 2013 was passed. That created the Federal Reserve banking system, which then put the control of the U.S. economy into private stockholders' hands, into the big bankers' hands, instead of being in the hands of the Congress. That was one thing. And then 3 years later, there was another organization formed called the Brookings Institute. That was 1916. And then in 1921, another organization was formed called the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, you may think that these are unrelated developments, but they're not. One man participated in the formation of all three of these institutions: Federal Reserve Banking System, Brookings Institute, Council on Foreign Relations. One person. Let me tell you the story. You need to know it because it is like the 800-pound gorilla in the living room in this present election. There was a man by the name of Paul Warburg. He came from Germany. He was a member of the M.M. Warburg and Company banking family, one of the most powerful banking firms in Europe. In 1895, Warburg came to the United States and married Nina Loeb, daughter of Solomon Loeb, the founder of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. This formed an alliance between Warburg and Company in Germany and Kuhn, Loeb and Company in the U.S. Now remember, Germany and Europe had central banking for many years, and that's one of the things that our forefathers came to America to get away from, and so they had resisted a central banking system since the founding of our nation. However, in 1902, Warburg moved to the United States and became a partner in Kuhn, Loeb and Company. He also remained a partner in the Warburg family firm in Hamburg, Germany. Now, because of Warburg's outstanding knowledge of banking, he quickly became very influential in banking circles in the U.S. Now, upon arriving in America, he began to write papers promoting the establishment of a central banking system. Well, soon Warburg acquired a powerful ally, Senator Nelson W. Aldrich of Rhode Island. He was the czar of the Republican Party and chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Now, most of you may not recognize Nelson Aldrich, but if I call this name, perhaps you would recognize it: Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. You see, it was the daughter of Nelson Aldrich that married into the David Rockefeller family, and they had a son called Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, who eventually became vice president of the United States of America. Well, Nelson Aldrich became the ally of Paul Warburg in establishing the Federal Reserve banking system. Now, here's the way it all came down. It happened at a secret meeting, and I mean secret, on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia in 2010. In November of that year, under the guise of a duck hunt, Senator Aldrich, Paul Warburg, and 4 other experts, banking experts, sneaked off to discuss a bank reform at a secret hideaway in Jekyll Island off the Georgia coast. Now, those in attendance included Henry Davison of the Morgan Bank. Today you would know that as J.P. Morgan, or J.P. Morgan Chase now it is. Frank Vanderlip of National City Bank, Benjamin Strong, the Vice President of Bankers Trust Company, and Piet Andrew, former Secretary of the National Monetary Commission and now Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. The real purpose of this historic duck hunt, they actually carried empty gun cases, and they went by their first names because they didn't want anybody to know that the big banks who were supposed to be in competition were actually collaborating together, and they were having this secret meeting of these high-level bankers. So they went under the guise of going for a duck hunt on Jekyll Island. Well, the real purpose of this historic duck hunt was to formulate a plan for U.S. banking and currency reform that Aldrich would then present to the Congress. Now, during this secret meeting of powerful banking interests, the general outline of the Federal Reserve Act was determined. Mr. Paul Warburg was the principal architect. Now remember, Paul Warburg was from Germany, from the hotbed of central bankers, and at this time he was not even a citizen of the United States of America. Yet he becomes the principal architect of the Federal Reserve Act, which was going to be passed 2 or 3 years later. Now, before we go on, let me make sure that you understand something. We didn't want a central banking system here in the United States of America. But Warburg brought all of the know-how, the central bank structure from Europe, and he sold it, and the big bankers were glad to buy because it was going to put the absolute control of the American economy in their hands. So he sold it. Furthermore, they decided that Senator Aldrich would tell the media, this act is going to save America from the control of the big bankers. But ladies and gentlemen, it was written by the big bankers. Now listen, I'm telling you the absolute truth, and you need to listen, because the Federal Reserve Act to this very moment is playing a role in our present presidential campaign. So the purpose of the Federal Reserve Act was to place control of America's money in the hands of the private bankers. If it was passed, the Federal Reserve Board would set interest rates and determine the amount of money in circulation. Up to that time, that was under the venue of the U.S. Congress. They're the ones that determine interest rates, and they're the ones that determine how much money was in circulation, which of course meant you could either speed the economy up or you could cool it down, slow it down. Now, you should know at this juncture that a man by the name of Mayer Amschel Rothschild, he was the one that formed the greatest wealth, the greatest amassing of wealth in the world, and still is to this day. He was the founding father of the famous Rothschild family, which became the biggest banking and most powerful banking firm in the world. Here's what he said: "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes her laws. You give me control of a nation's money, I can buy your politicians." Does that sound familiar in this present presidential campaign? Yeah, who's financing your super PAC? How did Jeb Bush have $130 million to spend? Turns out all in vain. Where's all the rest of the candidates getting their money from? Well, if you'll trace it down, and you're going to have a hard time because these people have become very skillful at concealing their donations. But if you'll trace it back, it's to the people that control the money of the United States of America. The big bankers, they're the ones that finance the campaigns of both sides, Republicans, Democrats. It's called heads, I win, tails, you lose. So they pad both sides. Well, Amschel Rothschild, he was the founder of the Rothschild dynasty in Frankfurt, Germany, during the time of the Holy Roman Empire. He lived from 1744 until about 1812. So that's when this all began. Now, let me tell you a quote that was given out at Jekyll Island by one of the big bankers. He said, "If it were to be exposed publicly that our particular group," and he's talking about the elite bankers, "had gotten together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatsoever of passage by Congress." That's what Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank of New York, one of the most powerful banking firms at the time. So what happened next? They wrote the bill in 2010. I said 2010, I meant 1910. And then by 1913, they were ready to get it passed. But there was a lot of sentiment against it. So they saved it until 2 days before Christmas. Now, nothing like this ever happens politically today, but that's the way they did things back in those days. 2 days before Christmas, most of the lawmakers had gone home. And on December the 23rd of 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. Now, I want to remind you at this point, this name Federal Reserve is very deceptive because of the word federal. But the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. It's a name, but it is not a federal agency. The Federal Reserve has private stockholders and is held by private banks, and you can't buy stock in the Federal Reserve. It's a very elite club that's allowed to buy stock there. So the Federal Reserve is not federal law. It's owned by private banking interest. Now, this act, when it was passed, gave private banking interest control of the U.S. economy, and it has had the United States of America by the throat ever since. Now, I'm going to have to hurry because I've got a lot of information to give you today. So Mr. Paul Warburg became the father of the Federal Reserve. He moved to the United States in 1902. He became the partner with Kuhn Loeb and Company. Then he immediately began promoting a central bank for the United States. He designed the Federal Reserve System November of 1910. He became a U.S. citizen in 1911 after he had already designed the new banking system for America. And then he was appointed a member of the first Federal Reserve Board in 2013 by President Woodrow Wilson. So there was a master plan going on here. Now, in Europe, they were intimately acquainted with European central banks. This Mr. Warburg was, especially the German Reichsbank. Warburg didn't claim to originate new banking principles so much as importing European practices. So what we sought to get away from has now sneaked in the back door and has now gained power in the United States of America. Do you realize that the Federal Reserve has not been audited one time since it was founded? You can't get access to its books. Congress cannot audit it. The president cannot audit it. They are a power on the throne that's amazing. Rand Paul actually promoted a bill called Audit the Fed. He recently was able to get a vote on it. It failed. As a matter of fact, he brought it up in one of the presidential campaigns. He said to Ted Cruz, we fought for years to get a bill to audit the Fed, and the day we voted on it, you didn't bother to show up. Well, of course, he was accusing Ted Cruz of being beholden to the big banks because his wife is a director for Goldman Sachs. And he has a large loan from one of the banks. So now I don't know what that's all about. I don't have the answer to all that. I'm just simply telling you, this Federal Reserve has become an issue even in the present presidential campaign. Okay, now we talked about the Federal Reserve, but I told you about the Brookings Institute that was founded in 1916. What's that all about? Well, the Brookings Institute was designed to be a think tank, which was designed to conduct research and formulate policies that could be enacted by the federal government. I mean, after all, when you're a politician, you've got to be running for office all the time. You've got to be doing your job. You've got to be campaigning, kissing babies, a lot of things, attending funerals. And so you really don't have the time to pound out the intricate policies that are necessary to lead the government. But the Brookings Institute was founded, none of them were to hold offices. They were founded in order to spend their time behind the scenes writing white papers, formulating policies, which they then could hand feed to the government, the Congress, and the president. That's what the Brookings Institute was all designed for. It's a think tank. Now, a Brookings expert helped refine the blueprint for President Franklin D. Roosevelt's dream of the United Nations. Mr. Paul Warburg became a trustee of the Brookings Institute, serving until its death. Okay, now listen to me. You got the Federal Reserve. Paul Warburg is the author of that. He's a founding trustee on the Brookings Institute in 1916. 5 years later, the Council on Foreign Relations was formed. What's the Council on Foreign Relations? Formed in 1921, membership by invitation only. Its purpose is to influence American foreign policy and to prepare its members for key positions in the government. Somebody's got to train up the politicians and mold them and make them until they're deemed ready to take their place so that they can cooperate with the Federal Reserve and cooperate with the Brookings Institute. Now, oh, by the way, you might want to know Paul Warburg became a director of the Council on Foreign Relations at its founding in 1921, remaining on the board until his death. Now, why am I going through all this? I'm talking about the word establishment. They established control over banking. They established control over the thinking of America, which they funnel into the media, which the media funnels to you and to me. They guide our thinking by what people talk about on the talk programs, by what's been published in the newspapers. And then the Council on Foreign Relations is designed, it's the incubator for the production of the rulers of our country. You say, how serious is it? Well, let me just tell you this. In the last 50 years, 50% of all cabinet members have come from the Council on Foreign Relations. And it doesn't matter whether the Republicans win the election or the Democrats win the election. That's the reason you get the feeling you're voting for Tweedledee or Tweedledum. I am putting my finger today on the establishment. And that's become the main campaign. Will we do the same old, or is there someone that could deliver us from the clutches of the establishment that's had this nation by the throat for almost 100 years? Okay, obviously, Mr. Paul Warburg was mortal, so he died. But that's not the end of the story. Now, please meet James Paul Warburg, his son. James Paul Warburg appeared before the Senate to testify. And when he did, he stated this: we shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The question is only whether the world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest. Now, he's testifying before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations on February the 17th of 1950. You can go to the congressional record and read it for yourself. Now, James Paul Warburg endorsed world government. Now, he's the son of Paul Warburg, who became the father of the Federal Reserve. He was the founding trustee on the Brookings Institute. He was a founding trustee on the Council on Foreign Relations. And all that was by design, and all the ideas were brought over from Europe. Right now, Bernie Sanders thinks we should be like Europe. He's campaigning on that platform. Anyway, before the Senate Foreign Committee, James Paul Warburg said, I think the essential thing we should undertake is that we declare our willingness to participate in some sort of world organization capable of enacting, administering, interpreting, and enforcing world law, whether you call it a federation, a government, or world order. Now, that's what Mr. James Paul Warburg had to say as he was testifying before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations on February the 17th of 1950. Now, James Warburg also became an advisor to President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the time he was devising the United Nations, and make no mistake about it, he was devising the United Nations to be a one world governmental system, and that's the purpose for the United Nations right now. Our leaders are moving us as fast as they can into this, as fast as we're willing to accept it. Now they've hit a big problem because all of a sudden the campaign is focused on the establishment versus those who don't want to surrender U.S. sovereignty, from those who want to let down all the barriers. Come one, come all. Let's have a mixture. There's no such thing as Americans in Judeo-Christian culture. We're going to break all that down. We're going to have a new world order. And all of a sudden, the issue has become, are we going to build this wall, or are we going to keep all this out? This is changing our Judeo-Christian culture. This is going the wrong direction. Now they've moved out all of our 10 Commandments off of the lawns. And now that you can't pray in the schools anymore, where did all this junk come from? It has come from the global plan that was started 100 years ago with this man from Germany by the name of Mr. Paul Warburg. Oh, by the way, his son, James Paul Warburg, yes, he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. All right, now let's jump ahead to today. What is the Federal Reserve right now? It meets every quarter to decide whether the interest rates go up, go down, or stay the same. Over the past 20 years, there have been times they've raised the interest rates to cool the markets down, or else they've lowered the interest rates to speed them up. Right now, interest rates are historically low, and it doesn't seem like no matter what they do, they can't get the economy going again, because government has become such a burden on the backs of people. People are hoarding anything they can get their hands on, because as soon as they invest in a business, the government reaches its hands out to take a large percentage of what they're trying to do. So consequently, everything is slowing down. The bigger government gets and the heavier the burden gets, the less chance people are willing to take. Okay, so when the Fed meets, though, everybody watches with bated breath. If they up the interest 0.25%, well, if the international community likes it, then we have a brief flurry and a rally in the stock market in New York. That's what goes on. So the financial markets either immediately respond positively or negatively. Now, Mr. Ron Paul, who has ran for president several times, we interviewed him here on our program, and he has served on the House Financial Services Committee. He was chairman of the subcommittee on domestic and monetary policy. Well, just before he was coming on our program, I had noticed a little piece in the paper that said the Fed is not going to any longer report on money supply. It had been the custom every year. The Fed would say, this is how many dollars are in circulation. And when I saw that, they're not going to do it anymore, I thought, oh my goodness, they're getting ready to print money like there's no tomorrow, and they don't want us to know how much. Well, I'm going to tell you when I get back what Ron Paul said to me. We're talking today about the real core issue of this present presidential campaign. You're listening to End of the Age. Give us a call, 800 Endtime to reach our operators, 877 to reach me.
When current events are found in Bible prophecy, it's astonishing. At Endtime Ministries, we are seeing them unfold every day, and so can you. We've put together a current events in Bible prophecy package for anyone who wants to understand like never before. Irvin Baxter and his dedicated staff have spent hundreds of hours of research and study, and in doing so have discovered that current events in Bible prophecy are telling the same story. These 13 DVDs will prepare you to be ready in this extraordinary time that God has destined you to live. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and save over 20% when you buy the current events in Bible prophecy package.
America's God-given destiny, breaking prophetic fulfillments, and the Great Tribulation. With topics such as these, you are not going to want to miss upcoming End-Time Prophecy conferences. Irvin Baxter will be traveling to many cities where he'll be teaching these exciting lessons. To those of you in Hurst, Texas, Merrillville, Indiana, and Brooklyn, Arkansas, he'll be heading your way soon. Come meet our End-Time team and other people like you who want to learn what God has in store in the days ahead. View our wide selection of prophecy materials and take end-time lessons home to share with family and friends. Go to endtime.com and under events, click the conference link or call 1-800-ENDTIME to find more details about these conferences. We'll see you there.
If your radio station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com to continue to listen to today's broadcast.
Let me take just a moment before we resume our subject here today. The material that you're hearing right now, that I've been giving you as fast as I can in the first half hour of our program, is available on a DVD. It's called Master Plan of the Dragon. Now, it contains so much more than I've been able to give you on this program, but if you'd like to have it, it's a DVD, and it's called Master Plan of the Dragon. Just call us. 800-ENDTIME is the number to call. You can get your own copy. Just ask them for Master Plan of the Dragon. I think this is one DVD that every person on earth needs to view carefully right now. So one more time, call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME, and ask for Master Plan of the Dragon. Now, I was telling you before the break that Mr. Ron Paul, who was in Congress at the time, was coming on our program. And when we came on, I had noticed that there was this item in the paper that the Fed was going to quit making public the money supply. How does the Fed decide not to tell U.S. citizens how much money is in circulation? Well, they do it because they're not controlled by the government. They control the government. Well, anyway, since Mr. Ron Paul was chairman of the subcommittee on America's finance, I thought, well, he'll know. So I mentioned to him that I had seen this article, and Mr. Ron Paul said yes. And so I said to him, well, Congressman, do you know what the money supply of the United States is? He said, no. I said, so can you find out? He said, no. I said, Mr. Congressman, you're the chairman of the Finance Committee in our Congress. They're the ones that's supposed to make all the financial policies, and you can't find out how much money is in circulation? He said, no. Why? Because the Federal Reserve is more powerful than our government. Now, here's what happened. Remember the bailout of 2008. Well, Mr. Ben Bernanke, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve at the time, came in before the Senate for questioning. And so the Senate asked, where did all the bailout money go? Mr. Bernanke said to our U.S. Senate, our lawmakers, we voted in, our representatives, I can't tell you that. He was pressed. He said, no, if I told you, you would know which banks are weak, and it may put them into a place there will be a run on the banks. I can't tell you that. Now, we found out later that millions went to foreign banks, all paid by the U.S. taxpayer. All these losses that were done by these bad investment decisions by the big banks, they were all bailed out by you. The losses were shifted to the American taxpayer. And I watched very carefully in 2009, after all this bailout, I wanted to see how the banks were faring economically. So when they issued their report at the end of 2009, I couldn't believe my eyes. Some of the banks that had been bailed out showed record profits for that year. Well, then huge bonuses continued to be paid to the bank executives when they supposedly were doing so bad. It was mind-boggling to me. Now, what I'm talking to you about the establishment. I'm going to donate to your campaign, and you make sure you pass the laws that the banking system wants to pass. That's the plan. And we'll control everything. We'll control the money through the Federal Reserve. We'll control what people think and what people talk about through the Brookings Institute, and we'll control who's going to get elected by the Council on Foreign Relations. That's what you call the establishment. I'll tell you what, if you'd like to really know what your candidate's thinking, find out who the foreign affairs advisor is for your candidate that you think is the right person. And find out if that person is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. If he is, run the other way. Because he's part of the establishment. No matter, what happens is you give people two choices and they're both bad choices. And when everything's done, the same thing ends up happening. That's what's happened for the last 60 years. That's the issue. Establishment or anti-establishment. That's what it's all about. Are you aligned with the Federal Reserve, with the Brookings Institute, with the Council on Foreign Relations? If you are, you're the establishment. Now, Mr. Henry Kissinger, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, made this statement: who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls energy can control whole continents. who controls money controls the world. It's those people that have control of the world's money. Amschel Rothschild said, give me control over a nation's money. I don't care what kind of laws you pass. It won't make any difference to me. Okay, so what's the Brookings Institute today? July the 20th of 1992, I happened to be perusing one of the newsstands. I saw Time magazine there, and an article inside caught my eye. Birth of the Global Nation. Well, understanding Bible prophecy and knowing the Bible prophesies a world government that's coming. When I saw this article, Birth of the Global Nation, I bought the magazine immediately. Well, I read the article. It was written by a man by the name of Mr. Strobe Talbot. And he said in this article that in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist. We will all answer to a single global authority. I looked at that and said, that's exactly what the Bible prophesies. Who is this guy? Well, I found out pretty quickly because within 1 year, President Clinton picked him out of Time magazine to become Deputy Secretary of State for the United States of America. And he served in that position for the next 7 years until the end of the Clinton presidency. Now, when the Clinton presidency was over, now then Mr. Talbot needs another job. He landed a nice job. You're never going to believe it. He became the president of the Brookings Institute. I'm talking about the man who wrote that we are moving toward the birth of a global nation, of a one world governmental system. Now this man is the president in charge of the Brookings Institute. A year or so later, a bright young lady by the name of Susan Rice came to the Brookings Institute, and she became the senior fellow for foreign affairs there. Well, after serving there a short time, there was a man by the name of Barack Obama that decided to run for president. He called Strobe Talbot and says, Strobe, I need a good foreign policy advisor. Talbot said, got just the person for you, Susan Rice. So Susan Rice is working with Strobe Talbot, who says in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist. We'll all answer to a single global authority. You know what we're going to do? We're going to open the borders. We're not going to enforce any borders. Come on, come on. Muslims, Hindus, whoever, you don't have to embrace American values because we're going to have a great one world government. We're going to throw the doors of Europe open and we're going to have a global nation, just like Strobe Talbot said in his Time magazine article in 1992. So, Susan Rice, she went to advise President Obama during his campaign for the presidency. They won. Now that President Obama needs someone who's a globalist that can represent the United States of America at the global government called the United Nations. Guess who he chose? He chose Susan Rice, who worked for the man who said in the 21st century national sovereignty is going to cease to exist. We'll all answer to a single global authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about the establishment. That's what's going on right now. Okay. Shortly after the bailout, matter of fact, right after the election of Barack Obama in 2008, it was December the 8th, I believe, I was getting on a plane and they had a lot of newspapers there. It was going to be a long flight. And so they offered me a newspaper, and one of them was the Financial Times, and the lead story that day caught my attention. The title of the article was, "And Now for a World Government." Now I'm talking about the Financial Times, which is reputed to be the most influential financial publication in the world. It's published every day. Financial people read it religiously. So in this article, front page, within the first 30 days after the election by President Obama, everything's going so good. We got the bailout. Everything's moving together just according to the plan of the establishment. And it says, now for a world government. Well, I read the article on the flight. It's a couple of quotes. A taste of the ideas doing this rounds in Obama circles is offered by a recent report from the Managing Global Insecurity Project, whose small U.S. advisory group, listen carefully, includes John Podesta, the man heading Mr. Obama's transition team, and Strobe Talbott, the president of the Brookings Institute, from which Ms. Rice has just emerged. So we've got Podesta, Talbott, Rice, and they're all mentioned in this article, and now for a world government. Now, the Managing Global Insecurity Report, isn't that a great, ambitious project to manage global insecurity? We're going to make the whole world so secure. From the Managing Global Insecurity Report, argues for the creation of a UN High Commissioner for Counter-Terrorist Activity, someone that will oversee the war against all terrorism, a legally binding climate change agreement negotiated under the auspices of the United Nations, and the creation of a 50,000-strong UN peacekeeping force. So we've got to manage peace on earth through managing global terror. We've got to manage the environment through a climate change agreement, and we've got to have an army, a world army, to force everyone to do what we say. That's the three things that they said in this Managing Global Insecurities Report. And this was Mr. Podesta, Strobe Talbott, and Susan Rice. Okay, now watch. Once countries have pledged troops to this reserve army, the UN would have first call upon them. We now have a UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. That's the answer to their High Commissioner to oversee counterterrorism. NATO has now become the global army. We've got a lot more than 50,000 people there. And then a climate change agreement was just reached in Paris in December, on December the 14th of 2015. So all the goals of this cabal of people, this establishment, they've now been put into place, and we're moving forward like there's no tomorrow. Okay, now, but the present campaign threatens all that. The establishment is a panic right now because someone who is not financed by them and someone who doesn't agree with them threatens their 100-year project to bring about this new world order. Now, Strobe Talbott wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Great Experiment. The Great Experiment is a blatant endorsement of one world government. That's what's going on. We'll finish up. I'm going to try to take some of your calls in the last segment of the program. You're listening to End of the Age. If you'd like a copy of this information, a lot more, the DVD is entitled Master Plan of the Dragon. Give us a call, 800-END-TIME, Master Plan of the Dragon.
Many people are very concerned about the direction of our country, the United States of America. Some are predicting its demise. But we at Endtime Ministries are happy to announce that there is hope for the future of our nation we love so much. The United States and its special role in the future are specifically prophesied in the Bible. In our new DVD, America's God-Given Destiny, Irvin Baxter explains what the Bible says about the future of our nation and the role we are prophesied to fulfill in the end time. We have dedicated this new DVD to helping the Jewish people. As anti-Semitism is rising rapidly around the world, we want to help them get to safety in Israel. Go to endtime.com and under Irvin's Thoughts, click America's God-Given Destiny, or call 1-800-END-TIME to find out how you can be involved in this exciting project and receive our new DVD. Let's join together and bring revival to our nation by doing what God has called us to do.
Okay, we've talked about the Federal Reserve banking system. We've talked about the Brookings Institute. Let's talk about what the Council on Foreign Relations is today. Now, the CFR was kept secret for many years. Nobody knew about it. I mean, from its founding in 1921 Until about 20 or 30 years ago, nobody knew about it. But some investigative journalists began to nose around, and they noticed they had these meetings, and they found out about them, and they wrote some stories about them. And especially when you have people like David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, major players that are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Almost every Secretary of State in the last 50 years has been a member. And they begin to notice that whether the administration was Republican or Democratic, when you looked at the cabinet members, those people who really run things, over 50% were all coming from the Council on Foreign Relations, whether it was Democratic or Republican. Okay. Now, Admiral Chester Ward was invited to be a member of the CFR, and he accepted. However, he became so disillusioned when he found out what it was really all about. He said the CFR's goal is formation of an incrementally stronger world government. This is a member talking here. Admiral Chester Ward, former judge advocate of the U.S. Navy, was a CFR member for 16 years before resigning in disgust. He stated, the main purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is promoting the disarmament of U.S. sovereignty and national independence and submergence into an all-powerful one world government. That's the goal. Now, let's talk about proofs of world government. Is it happening right now? You've heard of globalization. That's the process of moving from the nation state form of our world to a global form of government. The birth of the global nation that Strobe Talbot was talking about. You hear the term international community, world community, global governance, new world order. What's all those terms mean? Are they just fancy names, or do they have meaning? Ladies and gentlemen, they have meaning. Ask the establishment, and they won't tell you. They don't want you to know that they are moving you step by step into a one world governmental system. But if you know your prophecies of your Bible, you know it's happening because the Bible prophesies in the days that we live in right now, there's going to be a one world government. And that's what this whole presidential election is coming down to. Will I vote for a member of the establishment? Not on your life. No. You say, who are they? I'm not naming names for you. You guys have to do your own homework. But if they're labeled establishment, or if they take the position of the establishment, then that's not who we need, because we have a chance in this election to break the bondage that's been enslaving America for the last 100 years. They thought they had their one world government, and they're in a panic right now because it's possible that that the whole thing they've been building for the last 100 years is going to go right down the tubes. All right. Now, we've had all kinds of things. UN permission for attack on Libya. The next day, NATO began to bomb Libya. Congress was not consulted at the time. They passed such things as responsibility to protect. What that says is the United Nations in 2005 passed a document that said the international community, if a government is treating their people unfairly, the international community has a responsibility to go in, flip out the government, and put in a government in the image of the UN. So it's world government is what it is. Now, the UN Charter only allowed intervention between nations. However, responsibility to protect now says, actually they issued a statement. It said sovereignty is no longer a right, but a privilege that can be revoked by the world community. President Herbert Walker Bush said that we now have the chance for a new world order and to see the United Nations become that entity that it was originally planned to be. It was planned to be a one world government, and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, President Bush Sr. said we now are within striking distance of our new world order. That's what the establishment's goal is. Mr. David Rockefeller has been a central player. He was the president of the Council on Foreign Relations for many, many years. And in his memoirs that he published in 2002 on page 405, listen to what he said. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are a part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. We're talking about the long president of the Council on Foreign Relations, David Rockefeller. We're talking about the chairman of the board for many years of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. We're talking about the closest friend to Henry Kissinger. Do you get the picture, ladies and gentlemen? This is what is going on right now. And it's so vital that we really understand what is happening. I'm almost out of time. However, I see our phones are lighting up, and I do want to take your calls. I want to remind you, if you want the complete story of what I've been talking about today, you may obtain our DVD called Master Plan of the Dragon, one of the best DVDs that we've ever done. Just call 1-800-ENDTIME, 1-800-363-8463, and you can order it right now. Now, in the meantime, let's get to the phones, and Billy is calling from Missouri. Hello, Billy.
Hello, Irvin.
You're on the air, Billy. What's on your mind?
Yes, I'm a partner, Irvin. Proud to be a partner. I called not long ago and told you that you're my hero, and you are.
Well, thank you.
I am a 78-year-old person filled with the Holy Ghost 33 years ago, was a unbeliever until I was 44, but that's not what I'm calling about. I am presently, sir, brother, writing a book about the present state of the church today, and it's not good. I'll let that go. Talk to us a few minutes about, as long as you will, about Revelation 13.
Well, that's everything that I'm speaking about today, Billy, and that is Revelation 13 is the prophecy of the way the world will look 3.5 years before Armageddon. We're moving into it now. And as you know, there's a beast there with the body of the leopard, which is the symbol of Germany, the feet of the bear, the symbol of Russia, the mouth of the lion, the symbol of Great Britain, and then the 10-horn kingdom that will come out of Europe. And that's going to make up the global nation that Strobe Talbot was talking about in his article. So we are watching the formation of this one world government, but there's no eagle's wings in Revelation 13. It appears to me that in this election, God may be getting ready to turn us around away from globalization and away from the establishment path that was charted 100 years ago with the founding of the Federal Reserve, the founding of the Brookings Institute, and the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations. It appears God may be turning us around right now. And that's the reason I want to do this program today, because people need to understand the spiritual ramifications, that it's more sometimes than what it appears, that God is really at work behind the scenes.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Billy. Thank you so very much. Oh, by the way, these three entities are all working together. Mr. Ben Bernanke, when he resigned from being the chairman of the Federal Reserve, a few weeks later, I saw this little article. He's got a new job. You'll never believe. He gets a new job with the Brookings Institute. So he goes from the Federal Reserve to the Brookings Institute. Well, they're all working for the same people, so it's no wonder. Let's go to Alabama. Junior is calling from Alabama. Hello, Junior.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. What's on your mind?
I had a couple of questions. The first one is, I want you to explain who the two witnesses are in Revelation, where it talked about they would be killed and lay in the street. And the second thing is, could you explain the steps, like the peace treaty, the Antichrist in the temple, and so forth, till the Lord comes back? And how long do you think that whole process is going to take from today? And we would love for you to come to Alabama sometime.
Well, thank you very much. I'd love to, Junior. Let me answer your question quickly because the clock is ticking on me here. As far as the two witnesses go, these are two men that are alive on this earth right now. We're getting too close to their ministries for them not to be already alive. God is preparing them, and they will be preaching the biblical truth. God doesn't send preachers to preach things that are not true. And so they will be preaching the full truth. Many people have believed they will be previous prophets that will rise from the dead and come to preach on earth. That's not going to happen. The only two, well, some people believe it's Moses and Elijah, other people Enoch and Elijah, but Moses and Elijah already appeared in a glorified state with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Furthermore, the prophecy does say Elijah will come before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And they asked Jesus, if you're the Messiah, where's Elijah? And Jesus said, I say unto you, Elijah's come already. You did to him whatever you would. And they understood he spoke of John the Baptist because John the Baptist came in the spirit and the power of Elijah. The two witnesses will be two men in the spirit and power of Moses and Elijah, but they will not be Moses and Elijah because Moses and Elijah could not possibly die. And these two witnesses, after their 3.5-year ministry, are going to be then killed by the Antichrist, and their dead bodies will lie in the streets for 3.5 days. So anyway, there are two men. I do not know right now who they are for certain, but they are two men, and when the time comes, they will start their ministry halfway through the final 7 years. Now, I want to try to answer your other question real quickly. I don't know how far away we are from the beginning of the final 7 years. There's a 7-year period that will begin with the establishment of a peace agreement between Palestinians and Israelis. We could be 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years away. Somewhere in that neighborhood is my opinion. And then once that happens, in the first 3.5 years of that agreement, a temple is going to be built, animal sacrifices will be resumed, and then the Antichrist is going to stop the sacrifices. And that's at the halfway point of the final 7-year period. That begins the Great Tribulation. And it's during that last half of the 7-year period, the final 3.5 years, that the mark of the beast will be implemented. Now, that's way too fast, and I know that, but I'm out of time. Thanks a lot, Junior, for your call today and for all of you listening. Now, one more time, we've given you a lot of information today, and I'm sure you could not retain it all. But if you would like to have it in DVD form and much more in-depth than I've been able to give you today, the name of the DVD is Master Plan of the Dragon. Satan has a master plan. It is being implemented on this earth right now, and this DVD will help you to understand it. Master Plan of the Dragon. If you'd like to have your own copy, the number to call is 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. And while you're at it, become a partner with Endtime Ministries. We need you now more than ever because the end time is right now. One more time, the phone number. 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. God bless you until tomorrow.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.